Hi, everyone. Welcome to a very special anniversary episode of Your Double Podcast. We have released over 50 episodes so far through the last year, and this is a very special episode. We have a group of people who have been fighting the abduction and alienation issue in Japan. This is going to be an in depth discussion between them on topics such as the experience a left behind parent goes through, how people can help, how politicians and global agencies can help, and so much more. I know what you're thinking, so who are the guests? But before we get to that, this is going to be a two-part episode. Some guests will appear in part one and some others in part two, as it's hard to get 6 high-profile individuals who are busy in their own life in a single call. The good news is that they all have been guests in our podcast before this. Now, who are the guests? We have the co-founders of FMP, Enrique and Deanielle with us. We also have Vincent Fichot, James Cook, Tomas Savickas, and Rachel Endo. All of them are left behind parents, and luckily for Rachel Endo, she has been reunited with her kids. You can listen to our previous episodes with them to know more about their stories. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's episode.
You can be just like me. You're double. All you have to do is ask to see your family. You have so much to see. You're double. When you learn about both cultures of your family tree. Bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, bum. We're double. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-bum, 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 bum, bum, bum.
All right, guys, let's move on to the next question. What are some of the costs that a parent end up having to manage this whole abduction and alienation thing that's happening? What did it cost you personally? As we normally discuss things that happen during the period of the abduction, but we rarely have discussed a lot about the cost that was incurred while managing this alienation and abduction. These costs here can be financial costs or personal costs or relationship cost, any way that you want to interpret it. Why don't you start, James?
Well, I'm glad you fleshed out, the guidance on that answer. The financial costs, I won't necessarily get into because I created my own financial problems prior to all this, and they just compounded. But this, as my local attorney, was so eloquent in pointing out one time, but she said, this cost you everything in my life, anything and everything that mattered. It cost me this. It's cost me friendships. It's cost me strained relationships with some of my relatives. It's cost me financially, which the theory is you can always make back money. It cost me, financially, like bankruptcy. It cost me relationally. I don't know that it's not that I don't trust women. That's not that thing. And I'm not saying that just because I'm going to say something like this. It is, I don't make permanent plans for anything. A big decision for me was to actually buy a car and have a car payment. Because what if I got the word that I could go live in Japan and see my kids? I'm fucking leaving that car. Same thing with a house. I rent apartments and then I rent apartments that are far bigger than what I need just in case they might come. Or I look at buying a house. If I buy a house, do I buy it with 2-3 bedrooms, or do I buy it with more just in case they come back? And what if my ex-wife wants to come back and everything's cool? Or maybe my older boys will come. And so my life has been on hold for 7 years. It's been frozen in my heart in many ways. Emotionally, it's been frozen in terms of progress. I don't commit to a lot of things at all. And it's cost me that level of commitment and confidence into making a long-term decision on anything. That's what it's cost me. Still today, I live temporarily. I live my way. I form relationships. I make financial commitments with the mind too that I could just drop this in a second if circumstances with my kids change. So I'm unable to be committed to anybody or really anything, and it's created unrest in my job. I'm not a bad employee in any way. I'm not a bad leader, for the people I lead, but my commitment to my employer is not 100% because, like, in my back of my mind, I'll drop this in a New York minute if it means I can go see my kids. And so I don't want to buy a house. It's like I'm in a mortgage. I don't want to commit to that because I might be able to go see my kids, or they might come. So it's the ability to commit to something and move on and make a plan in my life. That is what it's cost me, is the ability to commit to make a plan, because there's always in the back of my mind that what if things change, is there's, people put the happy thing in an instant, something could change to the benefit for you. Don't ever give up, right? Well, okay. Well, the ugly flip side of that is, well, don't make any lasting commitments, because if it does change, you want to be as free and liquid financially and as personally as you possibly can. So I've shortchanged my employer. I've shortchanged my romantic relationships. I've shortchanged a lot of people in my life because my first commitment is to my kids and to resolve this situation. And I will drop all of that just to be with my kids again. And so that's what it's cost me.
Okay. Yeah, I have a lot of similar apprehensions that that Cook was talking about, where you feel like your life is on hold. And I don't have that problem as much anymore because I got my kids back, but I still have it to a degree with a lot of things. But yeah, when they were gone, I had to always hold out hope. And so I couldn't make any commitments, or, even during the divorce, I knew my ex wasn't going to follow the rules of the divorce, but I had to pretend that he was going to follow. Like, so if he was going to do the settlement like he was supposed to, or pay any child support like he was supposed to, then I could tell my children, okay, we're going to live here because I know I have this much money to get this house, or I know you're going to go to this school, or that sort of thing. And I was supposed to believe that was true when it wasn't. I knew he wasn't going to pay. But for the purposes of my trial in America, the judge believed it was true. Whenever we go in front of the judge, I had to assume, that he was going to do what he said he was going to do, to the judge. So I couldn't make any decisions. That's how it affected me before they were kidnapped. But, when the divorce started, I had not been given any child support orders because my ex convinced the judge that we didn't have time to litigate that because he had to leave right away for a job transfer back to Japan. So the judge acquiesced and did not litigate child support. So I got full physical custody and no money to take care of the kids when I was a stay-at-home mom. And we were in a house that his company was paying $4,000 a month for, and now they're suddenly not paying for it, and I have no income whatsoever. So I was already borrowing tons of money. I borrowed tons of money for the lawyer, for rent, for food, for everything. So I was already heavily in debt before the kids were kidnapped. Then when they were kidnapped, I was actually already homeless because he canceled the lease on the house and I couldn't borrow any more money to maintain the house. So I had to go live with family. And my family is very toxic. I think most of us come from toxic families, which makes us easy targets to these toxic partners. So my family is very toxic. So I couldn't stay with them very long, and I ended up homeless. After I got the kids back and we came back to America, I stayed with family, and shortly after I ended up homeless. So now, because Corona hit also, I had trouble looking for work and things like that. So I was like $200,000 in debt when I finally got my kids back, and I had to borrow $50,000 for the lawyer in Japan from my mother. And I didn't finish answering Enrique earlier when he asked me what did the judge do, if anything, to compensate. Well, when I got the kids back, he He tried to be kind of generous. He was trying to be on the generous side when he ordered the child support and the alimony and things, but he couldn't even really order any damages, and he had to make sure it was completely fair so that he didn't get accused. The judge didn't get, appealed or accused of ruling unfairly. So we had to still be as fair as possible, follow as many rules as possible. So is as generous as the judge could be while still following the rules. And it didn't help me any, though, because my ex had already skipped the country. He took all the money with him, and there was no money in America for the judges to, for the courts to access. So it put me in a homeless shelter. I have debt collectors calling, and I still have bills to my lawyers that I can't pay. And I, can't even break even, even with my current bills, let alone my old bills. So I'm, to put it succinctly, I'm $200,000 in debt and homeless, but I got my kids back. But I have to be grateful for that.
Well, I can relate to James a lot about having a life being frozen or on hold, so to speak, because every long-term decision I try to make, having a child abducted and having this, I almost can call it fantasy by now, about the child being returned or gaining access to is like literally you can't plan a lot of things to go forward. You can't move, let's say, to a different country, because if access is gonna happen, like particular in my case, if access is gonna happen, it can only happen in Japan. So I'm kind of imprisoning myself in Japan with the hope that maybe this year, maybe next year, or maybe sometime, whatever time soon, I'll be able to see my daughter and be however small part in her life. But this kind of thinking really hindrances on moving forward. In regards to work, in regards to house, in regards to a lot of things. And this is one of the things which a lot of people, unfortunately, will not understand. They will be like, oh, why don't you move away and just do this and that? And if things, happen to turn around, you can always go back. No, you can't always go back, because once you build your life around something, it's very difficult to change, especially when the situation in Japan, how, let's say, even by miraculous case, you're gonna get access to your children, and when you throw everything through whatever you were doing and get to that situation to be to try to be involved in it, and on the flimsiest of whims of the other party, you can lose that in a heartbeat. And then what do? You're gonna start again from zero. So this is like a big deal for me, and I've heard a lot of left behind parents saying exactly that the life is literally on hold, on pause, waiting for something concrete to happen, and that concrete to happen thing, it's really far away in a very distant future, unfortunately.
Yeah, in my own case or my situation, in hindsight, no, I'll save that comment for a different question, maybe. When after they left, I worked for like peanuts. Okay, I didn't even make $15 an hour doing medical assembly for 3 years, in way below what I used to, like a tiny fraction of what I used to make. Okay, simply because I had to have a job that I could throw away and leave, and then go back to, or and then go get some other staffing firm job just because at a drop of a hat, I had to go to Japan. And I had to be available to be there for a while and not have to worry about being fired, which meant my living conditions were very diminished. I rented a room in someone's basement or their house. And so I lived very miserly just because something could change. Had my ex-wife, or wife at that time, we hadn't been divorced yet, had she had the wherewithal to have actually communicated with me, I could have attained a better job, been making more money, and maybe even paying her some of that. And I even offered her a big amount of money and to drop the whole proceeding and let's work out an agreement. And she refused that. She would be much better off legally. There wouldn't be a warrant for her arrest. She'd be much better off financially because I would have paid her. Had she had people around her coaching her to go, wait, you've known him for most of your adult life. She lived more years in the United States than she lived in Japan until just recently. Okay. You know this guy to always be fair. Why don't you just trust it and take his offers and things will work out? But she had a crazy attorney. She still does. That I think in other people who have an agenda, like my father, because quite honestly, I think my dad's going to spend everything he has to make sure my kids never talk to me, because it's going to take me about an afternoon to explain to them all the bullshit they were told. And I think he's got to go all in, because being the narcissist he is, he's made up a huge facade, and he's got that's going to crumble and shatter with some facts really quickly. And then he can't live with that. He can't, because my kids will never look upon him the same way again. Once they find out the reality and the true truth about a lot of this. But nonetheless, same thing with my ex-wife. She's going to, there's some facts that she's shaded that I can see in that, but that's a digression. But that, those decisions we make, all of that temporary living, being frozen in place has made it very difficult to move on in life. So I guess that, beyond the financial costs, that is still, I'll reiterate, that is the biggest cost, is this inability to move forward. And I kind of envy and quite honestly judge some of these people that I've met along the way who've gone and remarried and had more children after that. I'm never going to get married again. I'll just say that. I'm never going to get married again. I only have ever married one woman in my life. I'm only going to have one wife. We're divorced. And I can't imagine, in my mind and my heart, I can't imagine ever having another bride or any more children. I've only ever had one family, and I only ever will. That's my mindset, and that's how it's frozen I am about this. I can't move on.
Yeah, I had the same problem with having a throwaway job when I was in the divorce before the kids left, and I got a job just to show the courts that I was making efforts. And I had the same apprehension about getting a job because I knew I'd have to throw it away because I knew they were going to get kidnapped. And they did, and I had to just rush to Japan and just left that job behind. And that's exactly what happened. I just had to throw away that job. But, it's the same problem, just putting your life on hold for all these things, never knowing what's going to happen next. Because you know what's going to happen next, but nobody believes you. And you have to just follow this narrative that everyone thinks you're supposed to do when you know the truth, and you can't live your life that way.
Well, another thing I would like to point out to the audience is that the expectations from these left behind parents, the life is as bad can be at that point, yet you go in court and the judge will be expecting you to function like nothing ever happened. And for example, like Rachel pointed out, you'll need to have a job just in order to show that you're trying. And nobody will come and say like, oh, but it's normal to be a bit broken, because that that kind of calamity drives people to suicide. And instead of suiciding yourself, you're just not having a job right now. So that shouldn't be that bad. But in fact, and this happened to me in Japan too, when I went to court and they told me, oh, you're jobless, you're bad. Because in Japan, basically, if you're jobless is very bad. Being a thief in Japan is better because thief is an occupation, is a somewhat like a part-time job too. So the judge was like, "Oh my goodness, you're not working. You're bad. You can't be, you can't be regarded as a good person just because you don't work." And when I told them that my work is to find where my daughter is, they were like, "Oh my goodness, you're talking like retarded." Now we see why your wife ran away with the child, because you cannot function like a normal person. And it's sometimes you just really want to level down to them and ask, well, what about if your children were taken? What will be the next step you're gonna do? You wake up in the morning, you see that your children taken away, they've been abducted by North Korea, by your spouse, by Al Qaeda, by whomever. What's your next step? You're gonna go to the job agency to look for work? Well, what are you gonna do?
Oh yeah, on that regard, I've had instances of everything that James and have mentioned, and Rachel. Yeah, I've had instances of those. Of everything is on hold because you don't know when you have to go to Japan, and to some, yeah, and not being able to make commitments to anything. However, I think my biggest thing is always like, I need to have something stable so when they do come, in my mind, I'm set that I'm gonna get them back. And when I mean them, I mean Yumi, who she's technically still my wife and my child. But I think I've just focused, like, unfortunately, James, your case was something that I knew before going to Japan of. I didn't know you back then. I didn't know you in 2018. I didn't know details of your case, but I knew that you were all over the news, and I'd said that's not. If I stay here and that does happen, the probabilities are that that will happen to me if I stay here. So in my mind, I knew how to make it work somehow. But in terms of what has it cost me, I think the most that it's costed me, I'd say, is time, energy, obviously a lot of money, like a lot of money. And most of it's not on legal fees. So I learned very quickly from reading on the internet, putting pieces together that were out there, and that was why I decided to find my parent. But I really quickly realized that going through the legal route's not gonna get me anywhere. I mean, in legal fees, I probably spend, let's say $60,000, give or take, 60, maybe more. All of a sudden, they'll probably like, I might like 70 or 80 legal fees. I probably spent 50 in traveling, 50,000 in traveling. No, and I don't stay in like super high end stuff. I stay like the bare minimum stuff, But as you guys know, Drew, flying to Japan, it's not cheap, and I've done it multiple times, and I stay there for a prolonged period of times. But where it really has cost me, it's time and the value that I add or can add and learning. And when I mean learning is where I work at. Like, there's so many opportunities for me, and I've lost those opportunities of growth, personal growth for me. Nearly 3 years now. And that's something I have to make up. But in other aspects, I've learned a lot more. Like I said earlier, I've met wonderful people, like, everybody on this call. I co-founded this organization, which I really want to make change. I really want to empower children. I really want to bring this knowledge forward for everybody to know what's going on. This NGO, to get it going, at least to get the tech and everything going and ground up, this cost me a fortune. Most of my savings, to be honest with you. But I really, before I used to, those who know me, I would say like, hey, I never questioned people before, and I was like, oh, okay, that's what Bob said, and like whatever. I really didn't see the ulterior motives of an individual. Now everybody's like, what are their ulterior motives? Do they have one? And it really made me see that there's a lot of bad in humanity. Something I wasn't raised that way. I've never looked at looking at the bad side of humans or anything. That's not how my family raised me. So, but now I question everything, and I find myself doing that. I'm like, this is not right. This is not who I was raised to be. What's their motive behind doing A, B, C, D to me? I find myself doing that. Relationships wise, this is gonna sound quite strange. I have dated, and I realized that some of the one reason that my ex-wife, or my wife technically, the one thing that she did not like about me that she always complained about is true, is that I work too much and I don't spend enough time or dedicate enough time to another person. I've dated some people like, hey, you never talk to me, you never text me, yada, yada, yada. It's like, I'm busy, I'm working. And that's the one thing that I really regret for Yumi, that I didn't give her that time. Now that I look back, I'm like, man, she was right. That's all she wanted was time. And I never gave her that. So I came to that realization that I did screw up there. And as dark as it may sound here, and because we all bash Japan for what they are, but I do wish that I could have given her more of that. Now that I realize and done some self-reflection. Because I mean, before Find My Parent, before me taking on this court case, I used to work 16, 17 hours, 18 hours a day.
That's normal. That's normal in Japan. So, I mean, my ex would work that many hours and I didn't complain.
Yeah.
And I mean, she would have made any excuse she could. So, I mean, in that aspect, she had no right to complain, because if she'd married a Japanese, probably would have worked even more.
Well, if I may chirp in this thing, so Enrique has a problem with working too much. Well, my problem was opposite. I was giving her too much time. If I had worked like Japanese 18 hours a day, probably we might be still married today. And for me, family time was something not what do you call it, sacrosanct or something, but sacred, but sacred enough.
Yeah.
And I used to give her a lot of time. I was managing the time so we would be able to travel every 2 months or so abroad. she had a lot of opportunities to spend, time with me and actually enjoy that time. But she was sadly a workaholic. So you see, what happens in life if he's Japanese, we should have swapped our wives back in the day, and and the problem solved.
Well, in my situation with my family, when I wasn't at work, I was home. I owned part of the company, and so I had very lax hours, to the chagrin of my father, he and I used to work together. But I made a point of being there every morning with my kids, eating breakfast with them, taking them to school. I made sure I was there to take them to school every morning. And I often cut out of work early to pick them up from the bus if I wanted to, or I would go have lunch with them at their school with them. So I was a very, very involved dad, all of which I'm sure has been shit upon and has been rewritten in the time they've been away. But I was very, very, very involved in their lives. I took them to a lot, if not all their doctor's appointments, 100% of their doctor's appointments that they would get shots at, because my ex-wife was very good at making sure I took them to those. I was at every prenatal appointment for both pregnancies, both times she was pregnant with two sets of twins, never missed any of them. I was I was the antithesis to the classic salaryman Japanese dad. I don't golf. I don't have hobbies. I don't go out with the guys. In fact, I don't have any guy friends really. So I had nothing distracted me from being with my family when I wasn't at work. And that worked very well until I didn't work. And that freaked her out. But that was, in my case, it was not a situation of neglect from my end. It was what led to the demise of us was the neglect from her end of me, and just almost flat out hostility of me towards me, which I could never understand. I've never embraced anybody in my life and had them bristle like she would, just shudder almost if I hugged her. And you can only do that as my Japanese attorney had the great insight to say. She says, it's humiliating. And I said, yes, it is. I couldn't put it in words, but she did. She said, it's humiliating to come up to someone and just the most fundamental, basic elements of human touch and affection get rejected or crapped upon like you're being gross. And you try to kiss her and she would give that, okay, get away. No, oh God, I don't want to do that. You're like, what? And you can only do that for so long before you're like, I don't think this chick digs me anymore. And I'm feeling rejected in all ways, that I'm sure in her lens, that's normal for Japan. But she had spent we'd spent 24 years together in the United States. We had 4 children. Eventually, I think you're going to catch on to some of the U.S. ways, the Western ways. But that was, it was a very, very long relationship. And to pick up on what a lot of this started with, I still to this day, I mean, there are 2 main players in here that actively are participating towards my heartbreak. One is my ex-wife, and as stupid as I am about this, I don't, in terms of stupid as a trust, but I miss her. In my heart, I miss her. And despite I'm upset with what she did. Maybe I'd forgive her, probably would, actually, if she came back. I don't know I could trust her very well for a while, but I miss her. I want her back. She is one of my favorite people in the whole world. There's a reason why I spent all those years with her. There's a reason why I married her. And it's hard to replace that person. In fact, I never will, as I said before. I can never replace that person. I'm getting emotional, sorry. To balance my emotion, I have no love loss in, I will go on the record, as awful as it sounds, I wish for my father the most awful, prolonged, tragic death any human being can ever suffer on the face of this earth for all time. because what he did is inhuman and violates the most basic elements in what he's continuing to do in one, what he did with me with regard to our business subsequent to that, and then now participating, actively being a co-abductor of my children, is beyond anything that's forgivable, truly. And I've long given up on the thought of karma coming and getting them, because all karma is about is based in revenge. I don't look at revenge other than at some point I hold out some hope that probably the single worst thing that could ever happen to him is that my kids find out the truth and look back at him with this look of utter crying betrayal and hurt in their heart. Not for, because I don't want them to experience it, but I want him to see that and know that you rotten motherfucker did that to my children. And I want you to see that. And I want you to die a million deaths when you look in their eyes and see what you did to them. You horrible excuse for a human being. So I miss my wife, and there's this other party that I wish the absolute worst upon.
All right, guys, let's move the questions to our next theme of this particular episode, okay? So if you guys notice who are the people within this particular podcast or this call now, right? There's a lot of foreigners talking about what Japanese is missing, what Japanese government can do, or what is currently happening with the Japanese families that's causing all these abductions and alienation to happen so rampant, right? Why are the Japanese people not talking much about it? Why are they quiet about it? Are they scared to speak up, or are they being suppressed? What are your opinions behind the lack of communication about this when it comes to the media, and also, social media included, and the general traditional media when it comes to these issues?
Yeah, I think from my travels to Japan, I didn't really have much knowledge of the Japanese culture prior to marrying Yumi. And even when we were married, she didn't really expose me much to the culture. I think she didn't. There's many things of her own culture that she didn't like about the Japanese culture. The one thing that she always said is something Japanese, the nail that sticks out gets hammered back in. I didn't quite understand that, and I think the reason why a lot of parents don't speak out is, I think there's three big reasons. Number one is one, that nail that sticks out gets hammered back in by everybody else. This is herd mentality. Second is you have no individuality, right? And I think for them is shame. I don't know why there's shame of that something. Their children are kidnapped or they're getting divorced, but for whatever reason they take it as shame, as failure. And last is I'm not sure if it's something to do with how they're raised or their background of just never questioning, or just never questioning their government or the superiors, because there's no, that's my perspective, and they just let it be.
Well, I think pretty much what you said is they're ashamed. They're ashamed to even speak up at all. I mean, either way, either side, if they're the kidnapper or if they're the victim, the left behind parent, either way, they're ashamed. Like, I think there's more shame in being the left behind person, because the narrative for them is that they deserved it. That the wife or parent or whoever ran away, they wouldn't have run away if you weren't so horrible and deserved it. So, to speak up and tell people that your partner ran away from you with your child is like admitting there's something wrong with you, and you get shamed. And so they don't even, they're ashamed to say anything at all about it. It's just always assumed that no one would run away from you unless there's a good reason or you were abusive. So they'll never, I don't think they'll ever speak up for that reason, because the social shame is it's just too heavy. It's too much for them. And they don't have any resources. There's nothing for them to fight. There's nobody backing them. It's sanctioned by society and the government. So it's like, massive gaslighting on them. I mean, they're already suffering for the loss of their kids, or whatever else was taken, the loss of their partner, their child, and money. And then on top of that, they're going to get gaslit, and they know it. So that's why they just, rather than even speak up, they'll just jump in front of a train. It's much easier than fighting back.
Yeah, and I think on that, if I might jump in, is most of them, not all of them, but I'd say there's a part of them who I think it's a very narcissistic society.
It is. It definitely is. And this narcissistic thing started as back in the day, my old teacher told me, whom I went to learn a little bit of kanji, like the basics of kanji, and that teacher told me that Japan wasn't like that before. Japan was really all about keeping a tight-knit families together. However, the reason behind it was more of the financial side of things, basically them being poor and they need to pull resources together to keep afloat, than actually, having a loving familial relationship. So, but this narcissistic thing started, namely, somewhere around, he said, in about like 1965, 70s. Well, as soon as people get affluent enough to afford anything they need, the basic necessities, housing, food, you name it, they started to shun their family members away because, oh, I don't need to listen to you no more. I don't need to codepend on you. I can be on my own, leave me alone, kind of thing. And so in the last like 50 years, this thing propagated so much so that now it's became a normalcy to even steal the children. Like literally, it became so normal that a child will be snatched every hour of every day in Japan, non-stop. One child per hour is being snatched while we speak, and yet nobody will speak about it like a calamity. Yet if this kind of thing would be happening in I don't know, let's say China, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, you name it, whatever, we will be screaming murder upon murder, day in and day out. We will not have any news. We will not even notice that Trump got elected. We'll be, oh my goodness, Iran, one child every hour is being stolen. Wow, 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 this, that, so on and so forth. And yet when it happens in Japan, somehow we try to brush it aside. Oh, it's Japan thing. Oh, it's an island. We do as culture. It's a cultural thing. Yet why we go and complain, to countries, let's say a good example, North Korea or Middle East. Oh, you do like this. It's their culture, live and be. And Japanese themselves, they see these abductions. Maybe when it happened, number one, number two, number three, it was some sort of like tragedy, calamity, and now it's became a normal thing, just normal thing. Oh, another child snatch. Yeah, so what's a big deal? Just another tick into the ledger. So
Well,
to speak.
to them though, it's not stealing if it's your own child. I mean, that's what it says in their laws. It says you can't steal the children, even if it's
No,
it's
actually,
confusing because it says, I remember it says in the laws you can't steal the children, but it doesn't count as stealing the children.
actually, the law is vague, so to speak, but the law prohibits children being taken away or kidnapped. So
Right.
to
Well,
to
it
be.
says that if the child speaks up or yells or screams, then it's kidnapping. So when you take a child away and they're not fighting it or screaming, then it's not kidnapping, from what I understand in their laws. But
No, that's a little interpretation of how the law is. The law is very simple. The removal of the child from whichever habitual place. It's kidnapping, screaming or not screaming. Doesn't matter if you take the child with ice cream, or you're gonna scold him all the way to out of the place. But it's just the interpretation, the way their family registry and understanding is done. And I explained this some time ago to Enrique and to you probably, Rachel, about having these blocks. So imagine having a block where let's say three people, two parents and a child will be, and then for whatever reason, one parent with a child will leave that block. And now immediately, the moment the leaving party goes and settles down in some other place, that will create another block. So now, even though you're legally still, married and have all parental rights and responsibilities, just because the other party created this so-called another block, you cannot go there and take the child back. That is exactly the point when we treat it as abduction. The initial removal, the removal from the initial block, from where everything started, for them is like it's family matter. So you don't know, the child wasn't abducted. They went to the park and they failed to come back. But God forbid you go into that other newly created block and try to take the child back and return to the initial one, then they will scream abduction left, right, and center. So this is why one of the reasons that even Japanese themselves, they kind of fail to acknowledge that the child is being actually abducted. Like, oh no, they just just walk in the park. We're gonna come back sometime, hopefully. But in reality, once we leave, they barely ever come back. It's like literally barely ever.
well,
Yeah.
I remember when I went to Japan after my kids were taken for their 6-week visitation to Japan, and I went there to see my kids and try to collect my kids back. My ex called the police on me, and when the police were standing there and I was standing there and my ex was standing there, he was discussing with the police and jokingly saying, because I'm upset and I'm saying, look, I've got these US court orders. He kidnapped my children. I want my children back. And he says, well, you can't kidnap your own child. And he says this to the policeman right there. And the policeman's like, well, yeah, he's right. He's got a point. And I'm like, okay, great. Well, then I will take the children with me right now. And he's like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, but they're my children. I can't kidnap my own children. And he was ready to arrest me if I took my own children. So, yeah, they're very hypocritical, and I probably in my instance, it's going with what Tom says. Once the children had been registered at the city office as living at his address, if I took them away from that place, then I'm kidnapping them. But he got the police officer on the same page with him, where he's like, well, I couldn't have kidnapped them because they're my kids. And I tried to make a very logical counter argument saying, they're my kids too. So can't I take them? And he's like, no, that's kidnapping.
But you see, this is the reason why the cop, he's not being, so to speak, hypocritical. He's using this block logic, which I just explained to
it's
you.
not.
That
It's not that nothing to do with that block logic. They're just fucking assholes. And in case in
yeah,
point,
it's
that's it.
But
I
but
get your
I
block
can,
thing. Your block thing, in theory, it's true, but that's not what he's thinking.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't the conversation at hand. The police officer didn't respond, well, he's registered. I can see it right here because we didn't have the registration papers in front of us or anything like that. But, at that moment in that time, their argument was, well, the father didn't kidnap the kids because he's the father.
Right.
In that particular conversation. And
Thomas is right. Thomas is right. That's how they will spin it legally in court.
Yes.
But that's not what the peanut head police officer is thinking.
Right.
well, we know what he was thinking, but
He's just
it would
thinking.
be
He was just thinking. Oh, is it Japanese and non-Japanese? He can speak Japanese. I'm going to side with this guy. It's easier to communicate with him.
Of course, that is a given.
As you like to say, done and dusted.
But the thing, how we come up with these kind of retarded thoughts, it's helpful to understand the background, what how it's where it stems from, and this is where it half of it, this is where it stems from. It's very logical for us.
No,
because we're raised differently, but it's very logical to them.
I would say this. Like I said, I told SK this, or Thomas, I think I told you. My coworker told me yesterday. She said that wife was Japanese, husband's American, 2 children. Husband died of cancer, age of 32. The mother got the children and went to Japan. The parents of the grieving child of the 32-year-old. It's like, well, where's my grandchildren? I want to see my grandchildren. Japanese widow said, tough luck, you'll never get to see your grandkids ever again. And this is not even any animosity. None. The child died, or the grandparent's child died, so her husband died. That's it. That's all it took.
Japanese are very good at cutting ties, bonds. We learned that the hard way. So once they make this decision, for whatever reason that might be, once they made their mind saying, I'm about to get the scissors and cut it, once they cut it, it's barely ever can be put back together. It's just, for them, it's inconceivable how can this relation be continued even though the loving part of it is done. Well, you don't need to love each other. You can be just civil. With a lot of people, we're just civil out and about. We don't love them in particular. We don't hate them, but we're just civil.
It's a zero-sum game.
In Japan,
It's either everything or nothing.
Yep. No, and to touch on there's a few buzzwords we threw around. One of them is narcissism, and how you create a narcissist is total neglect as a child. So they form no attachment to either parent. And so the affluence you talked about is a breeding ground, or one of the things that perpetuates it. But how the Japanese are so susceptible to narcissistic behavior is because there is no humanity grounding them. We have the United States, Western countries, both say the United States because I can speak with authority about US, right? We have a fundamental underlying sense of humanity in individual sovereign rights, okay? The value of the individual, inalienable rights, right? Japan is a collectivist society. No individual has any right that is in excess of the right of the group. So they are and were set up to fall into these narcissistic behaviors really easily because they don't have that grounding, that anchor of humanity. You look at the Japanese psychology, their understanding of human psychology is archaic, if not barbaric. And and I say this not because I'm a scholar, but I would dollars to donuts know more, a hell of a lot more about psychology and child psychology than any one of the quote unquote evaluators and child psychologists I've ever interacted with in Japan, because I've asked them point blank fundamental questions. They look at me like I got a dick growing out of my forehead. Like, what? And they don't get it. They are not taught, because as a society, they don't value individuals. And so as advice to the Japanese that are listening to this in English, and I don't know if we're going to do this in Japanese, but in English, you can understand in English, one of the things that they can do is individuals, again, speaking as individuals in that environment, or how to relate, is if they are fortunate enough to be parents, and if they're able to relate to our problem, our situation, as they imagine for a moment that their child is gone and taken from them, that feeling they have inside them, that's not for an object. That's not for a pet. That's not for a plant. That's for an actual human being. They need to channel that energy, that feeling, and start looking at their children and other people with that same sort of compassion and understanding. And when they go about their world, conduct themselves and hold others accountable to dealing with each other with compassion and understanding. Look to their officials that way. Instead of resigning to the reality like, oh, it's just, this is the way it is, say, screw that. That doesn't have to be the way it is. As Enrique already touched on, the zero-sum game. It is possible, and it's better for all of us as humanity if we always are looking for win-win solutions. I hate the word compromise, and I don't like to use because compromise is evil in often cases, because in a compromise between food and poison, only death can win. And so I don't like the idea of compromise, because there are truly horrible things on the other side of that equation. No matter how small it is, it's still awful. I'd rather come to win-win decisions that are based on what the fundamental truths are. What's in the best interest of perpetuating this individual in this situation, this family? Is it in the best interest to deny access to a child who has love for their parent, just like the parent has for that child? Is that right? No, it's not right. It's wrong. So if there are Japanese people listening to this and they want to relate, start turning it around and looking at it. If I were the child, what would I want? Not like, well, who's got more money? Who's got the better house? No, what would I want? And a child, if they can reflect back, fundamentally wants their parents, both of their parents, at a minimum in their life, if not in the same house, under the same roof. Because children know when their parents are around, children know they are safe, barring some psychopathic person. And we don't make our decisions in this world based on the extremes and the fringes. So anytime anybody wants to bring up extreme fringe cases like DV, fuck you. You're an idiot. You've just thrown yourself out of the discussion. Okay? We do not make decisions based on the margins. We make decisions on the greater whole. The greater whole is that people and children want to be with both their parents. When both their parents are around, even if they're arguing, the child still knows they're safe because my parents are here. They're my rock. They're my foundation. And by the sole custody rules of Japan, and by legally removing half of their foundation in their life, Japan is minting destroyed children. And a destroyed, unattached child is the breeding ground for narcissism. And one of the things that narcissists do, that people have talked about here, is that they have the love bomb, which they're not capable of doing in Japan too much, other than, unfortunately, Rachel, I'm sure, was exposed to it because your ex-husband seems classically trained in narcissism. The love bomb. And then if they don't like you, they devalue you. And if they don't need you, they discard you. Literally like you're dead, you don't exist. And so that's why we have such rampant discard in all these discussions. It's like we're trying to be erased, because that is what a narcissist does. And so it is a very narcissistic country. And it's based on that sort of, well, if you're of no value, and again, like a taker, or not a taker, but a matcher and a taker. If you are of no value to me, if there's no quid pro quo capable, forget it. We blow it up. I don't need you anymore. I move on. And so that is a lot of what Japan is based on. If Japanese want to change this, they have to, as an individual, change the way they do stuff. When be mindful of their interactions with people and relationships. Am I being at least an equal part of this relationship? Am I looking to get more from this person than I'm giving? That type of thing is what starts it turning. And when, also parents can refuse to fight, refuse to enrich the divorce incorporated over in Japan. I mean, Jesus, criminy. It's unconscionable and inhuman that divorce attorneys not just get paid for their time, they get a percentage of the reward, but they also get residual payments of any child support or spousal support. That is rife with corruption. That's breeding ground for that. And if there are people in this audience that are not from Japan that aren't aware of that, know that the Japanese legal system, particularly family law, has that kind of financial incentive to make sure people fight and they go to the mattresses and they do the most destructive, awful, they're the worst human beings possible in that process because they are enriching themselves. Unlike the US divorce courts here, there's only two kinds of practices of law that cannot get paid a percentage: patent attorneys and family law attorneys. They can't get percentage of the awards. They can only get paid for their time, okay? In Japan, there's a financial incentive, not to mention that money gets spread around to the politicians and to all the other people. Like in my impeachment before I filed for the 5 Supreme Court justices in my case that was filed with the Diet, we listed out evidence that shows all these DV shelters are part of this sort of arm's length transition cabal with the government and the Family Law Association, basically 90%. Or right around that. All the family law attorneys are part of the Japanese Communist Party. So, I mean, they're very proud of that fact. So there is corruption all throughout the system in Japan. And ultimately, the people that pay are the parents and ultimately the children. And so it's very difficult to change that. It's very difficult to change that within, other than if parents just decide not to fight anymore and just say, something, these are both our children. Let's not feed that beast and let's come up with an amicable situation and then change the law to joint custody or joint parenting time actually is what we ultimately want. Not necessarily custody, but joint parenting time.
Rhetorical question here. So just like Afghanistan, the United States, it was a hotbed grounds for breeding terrorists. I'd say that wouldn't we all agree that based on being raised in a country where you can express love or individualism, Japan's a hotbed for traits of breeding communism?
No, communism. They got collectivists. No, I don't know. I now that you've thrown that out there, I don't know if China and Japan are going to be that different in the near future.
Exactly. That's why I threw it out there.
What?
That's why I threw it out there.
Yeah, I don't know if that. I don't mean that to be provocative. I'm serious because China's got cash and they got money and they're getting all of our money from around the world. They're really good manufacturers and quite honestly capitalists when they need to be. And at the end of the day, it's as we flip across the other part of the ocean over there to Japan, they call about Japan Inc. One of the greatest. If people are wondering what can we do, one of the greatest ways of affecting Japan's behavior is to not buy their product. And that's it. They got nothing else to offer. They have an abundance of people and abundance of fish. And if we don't buy their products, they're done. They're on a whole a massive export country. They don't import much, but they're export. And as countries, if we wanted to affect change in Japan, we affect change economically. And that would be a very effective way of doing it. Say boycotting Japanese products, although that's kind of a loaded word.
Well, that's what I'm saying, James, is communism. Just think about China now.
Yeah.
It's just that one has a facade of being democratic, the other one doesn't. That's all.
Exactly. No, I'm with you. And I never thought of it that way. That's pretty cool.
My last question is, I know James kind of covered it already, but literally, what are our next steps? What can we do? We have Vincent, who is leading the EU side of things, and he has connections in Japan. And then if he has no several people in the EU, we have that other organization, I mean, I'll name them, back home here in the United States, who has several connections to the United States government. We can leverage Scott McIntyre with Australia. Chris Smith, right? He's been on record that he wants some change. What can we at Find My Parent do, and with the help of James, Rachel, Thomas, Vincent, and everybody else who's out there, what can we do and collectively come together and say, like, hey, let's get the US Congressman Chris Smith, several Diet members in Japan, and several French parliament members together and be like, let's do something. How can we go about that? Because I think if we were to do that, like this axis of powers, I think that's the only.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's so unfortunate that there's not more cohesion, because the reality is there are so many actors, whether they're foreign actors, local actors, working for a better future for Japanese children, for children around the world, and pushing for joint custody. The issue is that they do not work together. Anecdotally, we've been told many reasons. Sometimes it's because of pride, unfortunately, that some people just want to be the head of the movement. They want to get all the credit for what's done, and they fear that another NGO or actor might come in and kind of take the spotlight from them, which is very unfortunate, because I mean, at the end of the day, if positive change happens for children in Japan and families in Japan, we should all be proud of it. And the last thing that we should be worrying about is who is responsible for this change. I mean, at Find My Parent, that's always been our stance, is we don't care who's responsible for it. We don't need to have the spotlight put on us. We just want to support for a better future for Japanese children. So that's a reason. I think culture is another reason. So a lot of the actors are foreigners, maybe from Europe, from the US. And then you have a lot of local actors, Japanese, and they might have very different opinions about how things should be done and what needs to be done for change. Again, our stance has always been, we will never actually know what is the turning point for change until it happens. So what we believe is that each organization should focus on what they're best at. There's some organizations that are really great at diplomacy. They have strong connections to politicians in different countries, and they're really good at it. There's some organizations that are highly tech savvy, and they can do amazing things with technology. They should focus on that. But at the same time, we should be working together so that we can keep each other informed, support each other in different areas where we have a competitive advantage, etc. But unfortunately, it's not happening, and I think we're quite far from that. Yes. So Find My Parent does a lot for parents and for children. I think children are a group that we often forget about because they're behind closed doors. It's so much harder to reach children, but we shouldn't forget that it's so much even more important to reach those children because, again, they're not fully developed. They're highly vulnerable and they don't have a voice. It's so hard to reach them. So for parents, we do a number of things. We have a parent support group. Anybody's interested in joining that group, please get in contact with us or click on the link in the description. That allows parents from all around the world, not just Japan, to lean on each other for emotional support, for advice, for tips. That's really important service that we provide for parents. We also are working on building our partner list. We would really like to have a good list of partners, whether that be legal firms, mental health professionals, other NGOs, even translators, notaries, that parents can search for on our website so that when they need the support in any country around the world, they can easily find it on our website. And we provide a lot of knowledge resources to parents through our Knowledge Hub. Some of that is content that we create on our own to give them straightforward information about parental alienation, abduction in countries around the world, not just Japan. And then a lot of it is resources that are linked from other websites. Some of them can be, videos, stories, guidelines, and then go into really even very technical reports from governments about parental abduction and alienation. So that is, and then finally, actually, I should also mention finally, is we really strive to empower parents and children by giving them a platform to share their stories, giving them a platform to allow their voices to reach the world. And we do that through our Your Story initiative on our website, where parents can tell their story in written format and videos on our website for the world to see what has happened to them and their children. And through our podcast, where we host a number of left behind parents and even children. And again, they can tell their story in many languages so that people can understand what's happening to them. For children, we do the same things. We have a podcast that we are launching soon that is dedicated just to children, for children, by children, so that children can hear real stories about how others have managed, not just through parental abduction, but even divorce and the starting of parental alienation. Because again, it's very hard for children to find people they trust to talk to. And so we think that by using technology, we can give them some of that advice. We can let them know that they're not alone, that others have gone through it and others have successfully managed the situation, let's say. And then we also are launching a hotline for children. We will start with Japan, where they can reach out to our volunteers to get some support, some advice, just somebody to talk to, again, because it just doesn't exist. It's not there for children enough. So those are really the main initiatives and services that we are providing for parents, children, and even grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, because let's not also forget that these people have lost a very important part of their families as well, and they often need support.
Yeah, unity is one big missing thing. And about this organization in US, they're big, they're somewhat loud, yet unity is missing. And because it's missing, it's just talk for the sake of talking, unfortunately. And being talking and well, okay, so they were able to produce the Goldman Act, and now somebody came up with the idea that, so we produce an act, but now we need to produce another act to empower that act. Like that act has enough empowerment on its own. It's just people don't want to use it. So if they so want to be, on this like on the top of power side of things, let them be, but maybe go and lobby these politicians at the same time, not to actually just create something, but use what you created. Just put it in practice, what you just created.
Well, I'm new to all this, so I don't know how to motivate people in power. I don't know how you can do it other than money. And even if I had money, I wouldn't know what to do with it. But how to use that to motivate them, because at the end of the day, they're not going to push Japan. I guess because of the bases, they want to have their presence there and they want to play nice. So, I remember when I met with my congressman with a representative from back home, and they suggested not cutting a deal that was in the middle of negotiating about airplanes that Japan wanted. And the suggestion was to not give them the planes until they returned my kids. And, that that discussion never even like happened again. I mean, it was a good suggestion, but I'm sure nobody wants to rock the boat with Japan for whatever reason. I mean, and I don't know, how are we ever going to know what secret agreements or what ties they're trying to keep? There's no way. I think there's no way for us to really influence that. I don't know how we can do that.
I'm just baffled when it comes to US and this basis question. They want to have presence and whatnot, and that is even more of the reason for them to be able to do almost, I would say, whatever they want with Japan, because Japan, they can complain about having US troops in here, but the moment US troops leaves Japan, Japanese know very well the Chinese troop will replace Americans in a jiffy. Like literally, the last American will be stepping out, and at that very moment, the first Chinese will be stepping in. And therefore, Japanese know that, and America should be more than able to say, look, you don't want our troops, okay, sod off, go defend yourself. We'll see how long you will be able to do that. An hour, 15 minutes.
Yeah, but obviously it doesn't work that way. We don't have the power to just say, let's call them back. There's nothing we can do. And America's never going to do that because they like having that presence there. So they're never going to do that.
No, but we never gonna remove this presence from these shores anyways. So even just bluffing, like, okay, fuck off, we're pulling out the same way you were bluffing very good with Iraq, Afghanistan. You're bluffing like for a good 10 years, so you can do exactly the same with Japan. It's not about literally getting out of here, but it's just letting them know that, well, if we want to.
Yeah, but nobody is going to bluff because nobody in power has their kids kidnapped. They don't care. They don't care about our kids. We're nobodies. They're not going to do that for our kids.
Well, one bit of advice I want to give on this is, I think like I said, I've talked about the social media things, but along that, and a finer point, if we were to glorify and amplify the quote unquote heroes of child abduction return, and the politicians, that would shine a bright light on them, particularly as we're coming into an election cycle. Like Chris Smith is a hero. Mitch McConnell is a hero because he's gotten more kids back than any other senator in the US history. He's been instrumental in that. You've got other heroes. I will tell you that, in fact, the heroes are decidedly to only one political party in the US, not the other, which also might be an awakening for those on that side to maybe shore it up and step up. But shining a light on the success of doing this, all the while we highlight, every time we bring it up, we bring up the problem. Every time we show a hero about it, we bring up the problem, right? And so now it's really hard for someone, if you glorify Chris Smith and say he's instrumental, everybody go out and vote for Chris Smith, he's a wonderful dude, all that stuff. It's really hard for his opponent to come back and say, well, I don't care if he's for kids, so what if he's no, you can't. But the strategic move on that part is to co-opt that message and say, well, you know something, I'm going to fight harder for these kids. Well, great. Now we got both people arguing about who's going to serve our needs better, right? Now the conversation's out there. Someone's going to come up with something.
I love this, James. I love this, James.
So that's my advice.
I love this, and I think I'm going to talk to you later in the week, and while I'm in Mexico for work, I'll ping you about that because I love this idea.
I just want to put a closing part. Praise the heroes and shame the villains. So every time there's opportunity, shame Japan, shame the abductors. So that is also very important. Praise the heroes, shame the villains at every single opportunity. Every time you praise congressmen from saving a kid, bring up Japan, bring up the appalling record with abductions and children issues, and that will move things forward.
Yeah, praise the individual, shame the country. Don't ever shame anybody in Japan, shame the country because particularly our narrative, we like the David and Goliath story. Also, it's Japan that signed the treaty, and ultimately it's Japan that's not returning children, even though they want to push it off as individual people in Japan. It's Japan that signed the treaty.
All right, guys, thank you so much for being here and spending your afternoon with me and the podcast listeners. Now, I would like to remind everyone that our goal here is to share knowledge with you guys and show that you're not alone in this. With that said, if you need specific legal advice, please get your own independent advice from a qualified legal practitioner. If you're a minor or if you happen to have difficulties in understanding certain parts within this episode, please approach a responsible adult or someone knowledgeable in these topics and ask them for clarifications. We have done our best to make sure that it doesn't offend anyone. And if you have further questions or comments or feedback regarding Find My Parent or this interview, you can always email me at sk@findmyparent.org. If you're someone who got separated from your own parent and would like to find your parent again, please go to findmyparent.org and fill out your details. With the help of our smart algorithms and matching technology, we hope to help you find your alienated parent again. If you're part of an NGO or even a private company passionate about this topic, please reach out through the contact us page in findmyparent.org. And we hope to work together with you. All right, folks, that's it for this week. Speak to you next week. Take care till then.
You can be just like me. You're double. All you have to do is ask to see your family. You have so much to see. You're double. When you learn about both cultures of your family tree.
Ba-dum, ba-dum.